Good afternoon. My name is Brandon Carter. I'm an application engineer with Ally PLM Solutions. I want to welcome you to the Ally PLM Lunch Bytes series. I believe this is our 12th session of Lunch Bytes, somewhere around there. And I see a lot of familiar faces. Welcome back. For those of you that may be new, these sessions are designed to briefly explore some capabilities that you may not be aware of, or some things that you don't use all the time to kind of refresh. So once again, we usually create a topic and do a 30-minute kind of tips and tricks or cover a session during these Lunch Bytes sessions. If you don't know by now, we hold these sessions every other Thursday at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central. Today's session will be on using treatment features inside of synchronous technology, and also some round and blend options on either method, where they're using synchronous or the ordered mode. If you have any questions during today's session, please note them down and send them in an email. We have quite a few of you on the line with us today, so you're in listen-only mode, so we don't get feedback from speakerphones, etc. But once again, please note them. If you do have any questions whatsoever, send them to us. So let's go ahead and get started. The topics for today, like I said, I want to spend probably the first third of today's session, first 10 minutes or so, talking about some synchronous specific workflows that may be a little different from what we're used to in ordered. So we want to look at a couple of rounds. Basically, the main thing is reorder rounds with synchronous technology, how to use draft with synchronous technology, look at a couple options there, look at using thin wall with synchronous. That is quite different with synchronous than what we're used to with the ordered method. And then, like I said, the last 20 minutes or so, I want to look at some round options, some options you may or may not be aware of, and look at face blending, actually using blends to merge those faces about a radius or a chamfer. So those are the topics for today. So the first thing we're going to look at is using treatment features, using synchronous, and like I said, the first 10 minutes or so, we're going to take a look at some of these items and how the workflows are a little different. First of all, I just want to start off, here I am in synchronous. You see over here in Pathfinder that I am in the synchronous environment. I'm going to be using my radio button a lot today. For those of you that have been using ST3, you probably play with the radio button, 16 of your favorite commands right there at your mouse by holding down the right mouse button. So I'm going to be using that a lot today. There's the round command. One thing I want to point out before we get started too far, notice in the synchronous environment when I go to the flyout underneath round, how round, blend, chamfer with equal setbacks and unequal setbacks, how that's kind of split up a little more. And ordered, you see just round and chamfer, then all the options for those settings would be in each of those particular commands, which we'll look at a little bit later. So I'm just going to go into the round command. And the thing I want to start off with is just picking edges. I'm going to make that a little smaller. And I'm just picking my edges. I'm going to talk a little bit later about how to pick these and what the smart select, whether it's a chain or a face. So like I said, we'll come back to that topic just a little bit later. But I've just created my round. I've right-clicked to accept. And you'll notice that what if we wanted to reorder the order that these rounds are created. So if I'd created these as separate features, maybe round 1 and round 2, depending on whether the chain across here or the chain across the bottom, and an ordered, and with a history tree, we could reorder. We could drag round 2 above round 1, so to speak. Here I've created them all in one, but what if we want to do some of the same workflow? You notice the corner patch down there? If I just right click on that patch, you'll notice in the synchronous environment I can say reorder rounds. That was new with ST2. Just to show you another one, I'm just right clicking on that corner patch and saying reorder rounds. As far as editing around in synchronous technology, I can click it and get the edit definition handle per se, get the value there. If I want to make a quick change to that, I can do that synchronous solve and update that instantly. Once again, if I want to switch those back, I can right click and reorder rounds. So the purpose of this example is to point out that you can reorder those corner conditions, if you will, within synchronous technology. And that's just to kind of get us started. We're going to talk in more detail the last 20 minutes or so on rounds and the different round options. Moving on with some other treatment features here, once again in the synchronous environment, let's take a look at draft. So I'm going to go into the draft command. For those of you who have used draft before, maybe in an ordered environment, you'll see that we have options to draft from a plane, from an edge, from a parting surface. Maybe we have some kind of surface data. We've created a parting surface. We can draft from that. A parting line. Within that, we also can do a split draft or a step type draft. Now, first of all, I'm just going to start off with from plane. I'm just going to do a couple options. I just want to talk about some of the workflows here in synchronous. I don't have time to go through every single option of everything in this particular session, but the first step is to just pick my plane. And notice with synchronous, as I start picking those normal faces to that particular plane, notice how it previews my draft. And with all the other things you see in synchronous, you have a graphic handle there. So I can just click on that handle and notice how it switches my direction from my draft. So just by toggling that back and forth. I can right click to go and accept that. And one of the things you'll notice with draft knows that that is a draft type operation here in synchronous. So if I highlight the face set, I can go to my edit definition handle where you see the 10 degree value here, and notice how it brings that back up and I'm able to make changes. So if I've accidentally drafted the wrong way or I decide I need to draft the other direction, once again I can just click that handle and toggle the direction, or if I need to make a change of the value, I can make that 5 degrees in this case. I'm going to go ahead and undo back to where we didn't have draft. And the other thing, I kind of want to give you a tip and trick, or maybe you haven't used this, and point out a couple other tools as we go through. But maybe I want to do from plane and I want to do a split draft. Well, in this case, maybe I want to do a split draft halfway up this top protrusion. So for those of you that are maybe not as familiar with synchronous, if you look at your different plane options, I do not have parallel plane. But with synchronous, what we do is we just create a coincident plane, and then my steering wheel appears so I can come up and say, let me just offset that coincident plane right there at that midpoint. So now that plane is at that midpoint. So we can create parallel plane. You don't see a tool parallel plane, but what we do is create a coincident plane, and then just with our steering wheel, we just move it wherever we want, whether it's an angle plane, parallel plane, and so forth. So let's go back into the draft command. And like I said, I don't want to do from plane, I want to do a split type draft. I don't know if any of you have tried this before, even ordered or synchronous. And I'm going to pick that plane that I just created, then I'm going to pick my normal faces just as I had before. And then I'm going to right click to accept that and move on to the next step. Now you notice my draft handles, how it is a split type draft. Whether my cursor is out, it's going to do an outward type split draft, or cursor in, it's going to go inward. I'm going to click with it outward. Once again, I can type in my value and hit enter to accept that. Once again, if I need to make a change, I can go back to my little 10 degree edit definition handle, and you notice my handles are there. I can switch the direction of the draft. So it's very easy to go back and make changes to those. Just wanted to look at a couple ideas there with synchronous and draft. Not a ton of difference there between synchronous and ordered, but you know, some of the handles and the way that we edit those particular features are a little different. The one that is probably a little more different from the ordered perspective here in synchronous is the thin wall command. So the thin wall, I'm going to go into the thin wall command. For those of you that have been using the thin wall is where we shell out an entire part. So thin wall by default shells out the entire part. So right now you see it previewing 1 millimeter thickness. I just accepted that. In the ordered environment, we have a tool called thin region, where that we can go in and say I specifically only want to thin certain areas of my part. Maybe I only want to thin this handle, maybe I only want to thin the bottom part. Here with synchronous technology in the synchronous environment, you see that we do not have a thin region command. So what I want to do is kind of show you some tips and tricks of how to do something like that. So I just undid my thin wall operation that I just did. I'm going to go into the thin wall command, and just as I did before, I'm going to preview that 1 millimeter thickness. You're going to notice a button up here to add or exclude faces. In this case, I'm going to go through and say I do not want this bottom shape to take part in the thin wall. Maybe I also do not want the handle. So notice as I come through and pick that chain, and yes, I can window select. I'm just picking the faces so you see exactly what I'm selecting there. And you notice I said exclude those faces. Then when I right click, notice how it thinned everything except what I told it to exclude, just like we'd expect. Now if we want to create, right now we have a common thickness there from what's thinned at 1 millimeter. If we want to create maybe the bottom portion of that, maybe be 2 or 3 millimeters, and the handle be a different thickness, we can do that with more thin wall commands. So if I go into the thin wall command again, maybe I want this one to be 3 millimeters. Notice now how it's looking for a plus, so I can add faces. So in this case, I can say I want to add these faces, but I want it to be a different thin wall thickness. In this case, I added it as 3 millimeters. I can do the same thing up here if I want to add this chain again, and once again I can window select. I'm just showing you what faces I'm picking. And I've got that entire chain, and now I want to say I want to open that particular face. Maybe we want that to be 2 millimeters. I'm going to leave that face open. Notice how each of those areas are thinned differently. If I go to thin wall 6, that was the original with the 1 millimeter thickness. If I go to thin wall 7, that's the 3 millimeter. If I go to thin wall 8, notice that's the 2 millimeter. And then you see the edit definition handles where I can change that value. So maybe I want that to be 4. You notice how it changes the thin wall for those particular faces. With the synchronous idea, if you've looked at anything synchronous, you know that we add 3D PMI dimensions directly to the model and make a change. Notice if I do a smart dimension to that inside face and make a change to that, obviously it's going to maintain that thickness because it knows that that thin wall exists. So it's going to push out that thickness because of the thin wall. So that's a little different workflow for us to get different thicknesses, or at what we call a unique thickness inside of the ordered environment, and also have to do more of a thin region concept. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to show you that because that is a little different. The next thing I want to talk about, for those of you using either synchronous or ordered, I want to talk about some rounds and blends, and you know, that way everybody can take some tips and tricks away from these areas. First of all, the round command. We have edge-based rounding with the round command. We also will look at a blend type feature. I don't know if many of you have used that or not, where we're actually merging the faces with a blend or a chamfer. So the round command, you can kind of think of a ball rolling down that edge, adding and removing material to create that blend. You see to the right of there, we have a screenshot of some of the round parameters. I'm going to step through a few of those for you on a model, just to show you change. Different types of rounds we can do. Maybe we want to do a variable radius, give a little bit more control at certain points. You see on the bottom right screenshot, I'll show you how to do something like that. And then we're going to look at the blend command, as I mentioned. Maybe we do the blend command as a surface blend. Maybe we're doing some surfacing tools. And you see on the left we have 2 extruded surfaces normal to each other. On the bottom right we want to put a chamfer in there. So we can use the blend command, and it's more specifically with the surface blend option. And we'll take a look at that there at the end. Within the blend command, you're going to see some different options down at the bottom left, whether it's constant radius, constant width, chamfer, bevel, conic, and curvature continuous. So what I want to do is take a couple examples and go through and compare those options for you and see what each of those options do. As far as the screenshots you see on this slide, this is the part we're going to start with for most of the examples. You see there's not a blend here on this edge, or between these faces I should say, and also here I have a large cylinder with 2 cylinders coming out at a specific angle. So what I want to do with those is show you some different types of geometry and how the blends and rounds vary and the different options for them. So with that particular example, you see I have a screenshot with those angled cylinders coming off of the larger cylinder, and on the right you see the option that has constant radius, which is the default blend option. So we're blending those 2 cylindrical faces together with a constant radius, but maybe for what we're doing for manufacturing or for what our design intent is, that's adding a little bit too much material to the top of the round. Notice how it's top of the blend. Notice how it's filling that up. I suppose if I keep the same value and I do the option constant with blend, notice how it maintains a little better shape, maybe not add as much material. Obviously, whenever you're doing blending and rounding, it's very geometry specific of what you're doing. Also within the blend command, when we talk about blending these 2 faces together, we have an option for a chamfer. I'll step through that. We have an option for a bevel, which you'll see is basically a chamfer, but then we give it a ratio between which face we want it to encompass more. So you notice how it's kind of lower or more material being added to the lower face as opposed to the vertical face. Also with the conic, the same thing. We have a radius value there. We have a ratio showing that it can take more off from this face than that face, and I'll compare those values for you. And also we have a curvature continuous type blend, where that you can make this blend corner sharper or flatter, make it look more like a chamfer with a slight round. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of those examples. Like I said, I want to take a look at these round options. So as far as picking, this applies whether we're looking at synchronous or the ordered environment. Here I am in ordered. And what you want to look at is some different round options. So first of all, when we go into the round command, we're going to talk about blend and surface blend later, and we're going to look at variable radius in a minute, but I'm just doing the default constant radius. The first thing we want to look at is the select filter. So how do we select these edges? So edge and corner is just like you'd expect. It's going to do a single edge corner. If I do a chain, maybe it's a tangent chain, it'll pick that chain. If I want to do all blends on a face, notice how all edges on that face will select. Also, I could grab a feature and notice how it grabs everything on this protrusion feature. So those are different ways for how we can select those blends. Those are pretty straightforward. Sometimes those are nice tools to be able to help you grab faces a little faster. But let's think about what this is doing. So remember, for this particular example, I am in the ordered environment. So we have a linear history tree. I did protrusion 1. Now I'm going to do some rounds. So let's go into the round command. Excuse me, and then let's go ahead, and what I want to do first is pick chain or edge and corner, meaning that I'm picking these 4 edges individually. So I've picked those with 4 clicks. Let's go ahead and accept that. Maybe I want to add another round to the other side, and I'm going to use the face option. So notice how with just 1 click on that face, all 4 edges of that particular round are highlighted and those edges are rounded. All right, so the left face here, as my screen sits, I used the face option. The right, as I rotate that around, I use the chain option. I pick those 4 individually. So let's say I want to add a cutout right after protrusion 1. So I'm going to do a go to and before the rounding takes place. So I'm up here in my history tree. So let's look at the behavior of this. Maybe I'm just going to quickly come in here and do a cutout, maybe something that'll go in through the entire model. Just do an open profile. Go ahead and throw a couple of dimensions on this, give this a little bit of size. Once again, if you have been using ST3, you notice the radio button. I love the radio button. That's everything right at my mouse cursor. All right, so let's go ahead and cut this through. That's an open profile. I'm just going to blow that through there. Okay, so right now it's pending. I haven't recalculated the history tree. I'm still rolled back. Think about what you expect to happen. This was the side where I did the face input. Right, so I did face to do the rounds, and then the right side was where I did a chain. I individually picked those. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the bottom and recalculate that tree. And notice how the side that I did the face input, notice how the edges of the cutout update because that's part of the face at that particular time in the history tree. Whereas on the right side where I didn't do the, I did the chain or I picked them single selection, you'll see that it does not update that. So keep that in mind, depending on how you did your smart select. Maybe you made a change earlier in the history tree. Maybe that has an effect between, maybe an edge quit rounding or it did round, you didn't expect it to round. That could have something to do with that as well. As far as just some basic rounding options, if I come in here and I'm just going to round a couple edges. And you notice the round parameters, I showed you a screenshot. You see roll across tangent edges. So right now, even dynamically in this preview, you see how it's rolling up on that tangent edge. If I uncheck that, you'll see how it stops at that tangent edge. So right now it's checked. If I go ahead and preview that, I guess it'd help if I would create the other round, finish what I was wanting to do. Let me go ahead and add a round so I have something that goes over top of that. Let's just do a large 2-inch round. And here's what I want to show you. So I have it right now. I have it roll across tangent edges, and you kind of notice how if I look more at a top view, how this kind of goes out and merges over top of that tangent round. So that's what that option is doing, and that even shows you right here in the options dialog. If I turn that off, notice how it stops at that tangent point. So if I come down here and go back to the top view, notice how that blend that's previewed will go right up to the adjacent blend there. On the other side where I don't have a blend, let's look at what these other options do. Right now you have roll along sharp edges. And right now you probably don't notice the difference here, but you notice how this remains the same thickness in this case. So if I rotate around here, actually if I go to a back view, I'll go ahead and hit OK here and hit a back view. Back view is Control K for those of you that may not know that. Notice how the edge is straight across. That face is remaining the same size. If I go back to my options and I turn on cap sharp edges, you kind of see how this is going to kind of give a rolling effect on that thickness right there. Also, if I go back to a view, I hit OK, notice how it's starting to do that rolling effect. So there's some of the options that you see there with that particular blend. The final one that you see inside of those options, if I come down here, let's do something a little smaller, and I round a couple of these edges and I go back to the round parameters, you see how right now it says miter at a corner. You see I have my miter at my corner there. If I turn it to roll at the corner, notice how it rolls it as it goes across. So that dialog box is pretty good about showing you what's going to happen as far as those round parameters. The next thing we want to look at is the soften corner option inside the round command. So if I go to round, let's just go ahead and do some default rounding. Maybe I'll pick the face, and I don't know, let's just pick these verticals. So what I'm doing is looking at what's going to happen at these particular top 4 corners. Go ahead and accept and preview that. You'll notice that there's a soften corner step. So what that's going to allow us to do is create some setback value and to be able to soften that corner in, the entire corner, and kind of make it a little bit softer or a little bit not as sharp, so to speak. And what I'm going to do is, I guess it'd make the most sense just to show you what it looks like. So right now it's asking me to select a corner. So you see I've picked that corner. And we have 2 ways of defining our setback for that. We have distance and multiple of radius. So distance is a value. In this case I'm working with inches. So maybe I want to type in 2 inches, hit accept. So you notice how it softened that corner and it started it doing a soften back. It's doing a setback value of 2 inches away from that corner, and it's doing it in all 3 directions where each of those edges meet. So that's doing the same setback value. If I come over here and pick another corner, you'll see that there's an option to do unique edge values. So we're still doing setback, but what this allows me to do is pick different values in each direction. So as I hover my cursor over top of these lines, you'll see that, you know, this is the one going left to right horizontally. Maybe I want that to be a 2-inch setback. The next one is the vertical. Maybe I want that to be 3 inches. And then the one that's going away from us over on this side, you see it highlighting whenever I hold my cursor over top of there to give you the feedback. Maybe I want that to only be 1 inch. So I can accept that, and notice how it softens that corner. And this one, I guess I had them picked a little different. 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch. Notice the differences. So that option up here gives you the unique edge values to be able to do that. So that's the distance option. The other one is called multiple of radius. So what that means, notice how it's just kind of a multiplier. So I can go ahead and say, you know, I want the setback to be 1.5 times what my radius value is. So I've already picked that corner. Notice how it's only doing 1.5 my 1/4 inch radius in each direction. I can also come over here and I can do a unique value with that. I'm going to do multiple of radius again, turn on the unique edge values, and once again I can do a value. So this could be 1 times my radius value, this could be 1.5 times my radius value of 0.25, or maybe 2 times. So then you see the result there. So that is the soften corner option to get a little different results and different round or blending options for that. The next thing we'll talk about is the variable radius. So if I go into the round command into my options, you see the variable radius option. And what this is going to do is it's going to be an edge-based round. So I'm going to pick my edge, and what it's going to ask me is at what point do you want to be what radius. So notice how I grab that endpoint closest to us. Maybe I want that to be 20 millimeters. I can also grab a midpoint there. Maybe I want that to go down to 10. And I can also grab that other endpoint and maybe go back up to 20. So I can create a variable radius along that edge. A kind of a tip and trick to take that a little bit farther. You notice I can do endpoints and a midpoint with that particular example. What if I want a little bit more control? What I'm going to do is come in there and create a sketch, and I'm going to put some sketch points at that edge. Maybe I'll go ahead and dimension those. Just kind of locating those points where I want them along the edge. Then you'll notice whenever I come in and do my variable radius again, I'm going to pick that edge, and now I can also use those key points. I'm going to start off with my endpoint there of 20. Now notice I can grab that sketch point. Maybe I want that to be 15. Go and grab the midpoint as I did before. Make that 20. I'm going to grab my other sketch point. Maybe we'll go down to 5, make some drastic change there, and maybe we'll finish up back at 10 or something like that. So if you even finish that, notice how we can use those points to help control. Just a little tip and trick for you. If I go back in and edit the definition, you see that I have little dimensions that I can make changes at each of those points. So a variable radius allows you to give a little bit more control as you're transitioning, maybe as it transitions from one face to another or whatever the case may be. The last segment we want to talk about here is the blend command. So this was a screenshot I put up in front of you, and we're blending this cylindrical face to this larger cylindrical face, actually both those on each side. So you notice the one on the right, we're using a blend command with the constant radius option, and notice how it added a lot of material to the top, whereas the one on the left, we used the constant width option, and it didn't add as much material, kind of kept it neat, and obviously that depends on our design intent, which way we want. I'm going to go ahead and delete those and just create those again for you. So the blend command, here I'm in order. The blend command is found inside the options. You notice the blend option. And I'm just going to blend face to face what I want my radius value to be. And notice I'm using the constant radius here. And notice how much material, like we saw in the before I deleted it, there at the top. I want to do the constant width on the other side. I'm going to blend face to face. I'm going to do the same radius value. And notice how it doesn't add as much material. So obviously that's going to depend on your design intent, but I want to point out those options. To compare the last options inside the blend command, I'm going to go back into the blend option. So I'm in the round, went to the blend option. We looked at constant radius and constant width, but what if I want to blend these faces but create a chamfer between them? So I can go to the chamfer option. I'm going to pick both those faces. Maybe I'm going to do a 40 millimeter setback. So if I look at more of a front view of that, notice how it's a equal setback chamfer, 40 millimeters from the edge out, 40 millimeters up, and so forth. So it's just creating a chamfer by blending those faces together. If I go ahead and preview that, you see the result there. An optional option inside the blend command, if I go to the overflow, I can come over here and turn on what we call a full radius, and I can actually tell it to trim back. So I'm going to use that top chain on this side, the chain on this horizontal face, and notice the preview again. It's creating a chamfer, but it's also taking into account that full radius, that kind of where I trim back, so to speak, or I extended to, and notice the result I get. You can get a pretty complex shape just by doing a couple of different options with the blend command. That's pretty neat. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. So we looked at chamfer. The next option we saw on the PowerPoint was the bevel option. So I'm going to go back into blend. The next option down is bevel, and I'm going to blend this face to this face again with a 40 millimeter setback. Now you'll notice a value, and what this value is going to be is how much of each face it's going to blend. So with a value of 1, notice how the chamfer is equidistant inside of taking material or adding material to both, the same amount on each face. So the one value, the 1.00 value, made it equal distance. If I go back to my options, instead of 1, I make it 0.5. So notice how 0.5 will take more off, in this case, the left face or the vertical face. Notice how the chamfer is more, in that case, or the bevel. And the other thing to point out, that 40 millimeters that I'm typing in for the radius is actually the length of this hypotenuse. So it's the length of that edge rather than the setback. So keep that in mind as well. If I went 0.5 there. If I go 1.5, notice how it's going to move it and take more, or add more, I should say, to the other face. The same thing you're going to notice with the inside the blend command. The second to last option is the conic option. I'm going to blend this face to this face again. I'm using the same inputs, and I'm using the same radius value. Here, as similar to what we saw with the bevel, if I accept that, notice how it's putting that radius and it's taking the same, or in this case adding the same amount of material to each face. If I go back and I do a 0.5, notice how it's going to add more material or go farther up the face, kind of like what we saw with the bevel command. If I go back and I do a 1.5 and hit accept, notice how it's going to be more on the horizontal or the flat face. So what those values that we see over here or basically where the radius or the chamfer or the bevel, I should say, are going to exist between those faces and how it's going to merge. The final option, let me go ahead and undo that and get back to where we were. The final option with the blend command is a curvature continuous option. So I'm going to blend those two faces together again. I'm going to use 40 once again. Once again, you'll see the one value ratio, and notice how it puts it center. Notice how it merges a little more with the face, but what you're seeing is a very smooth radius, equally spaced from each face. If I go back to the options, and what this value is going to do is it's going to create how sharp or how flat this radius value is, how it merges. So for example, if I type in 0.5, notice how it makes it more flat, how it's actually creating it more. The more I go towards 0, the more it's going to look like a chamfer. If I go even smaller and do it 0.25, notice how it's almost chamfer-like. So it's flattening out that particular blend. If I go back and I go up above 1 and I do a 1.5, notice how it's making it sharper down in the corner. If I go maybe to 2, make it even sharper, notice how it's doing it sharper in the corner. I'll preview that. Notice how the face is merging. As we saw before with the other options, if I go to the overflow step and I turn on the full radius, I can come up here and say I want it to chain it and have it extend, and notice how it will completely blend that entire face. As I mentioned on the slide, was doing a surface blend. So maybe we do work with surfaces. We want to get a little different shape. Instead of creating an extruded surface with a round or a chamfer, maybe I have these two extruded surfaces. To create this is just a vertical line and a horizontal line. I use an extruded surface. If I go to round, you'll notice instead of blend, there's a surface blend. So that's what we're going to do with the surfaces. And I want to blend this face to this face. There's my same options we just went through with that particular solid, constant radius, constant width, chamfer, bevel, conic, and curvature continuous. Let's say we want to put a chamfer between these two surfaces. So maybe I want to enter my setback, hit accept. Now what it's asking me is which side do you want to apply the chamfer? From this face, how do you want it to blend? I want it to blend in that direction. In this case, I want it to blend in that direction. And notice how it's previewing the chamfer there between those two surfaces. And you'll see some options here. By default, what it's going to do is it's going to trim the output bin, which is the blend, which is the actual chamfer, and it's going to trim and stitch the input faces, which are from the surface. So notice how it's trimming it back. So it's one surface down to the chamfer and then the other surface. If I turn these options off, notice how it just puts the blend in there but does not trim the surfaces back. Notice it's just putting it in there. If I turn on the bottom option, trim output blend, see how it's actually trimming back to the side of the surface of the chamfer. And once again, if I turn both those on, it's going to trim back the input surfaces and give us that result. So those same options that we saw with the blend command when we were looking at with solid will apply here for surfacing as well. All right, so to wrap up, what we looked at the first 10 minutes or so was treatment features using synchronous technology. We looked at being able to reorder rounds inside of synchronous. That was an option new with ST2. We looked at the draft command and also how to create, just a reminder, how to create parallel planes to be able to do that split type draft. We also looked at the thin wall command. Remember, in synchronous there's no thin region command or a unique thickness option, so what we do is we do that with multiple thin walls. First we exclude the faces that we do not want to belong to the thin wall, then we go back and add them with a unique thickness, and that also allows us to do a thin region. And then we looked at round and blend options. Some of those you may have used, some of those you may not have used. We looked at the softened corner for the round, being able to do a setback value or a value like a 1.5 times the radius value for the setback for the soft corners. We also looked at the blend options, the different options for that, and how we can actually blend faces. The big thing when rounding, think, how big of a radius is and what's my available real estate. So a lot of times when you see your round failed, you made a change above it in a tree, think, well, is it what move that obviously that round will not fit in that spot? And then you can come back and maybe use some of the tools that you saw today to be able to fix those. Maybe it's a variable radius round to be able to, give it a little bit more control in a certain spot, or maybe even doing a blend. Just to wrap up here, as most of you know, Allied PLM Lunch Bytes can be seen on youtube.com/AlliedPLM. The replays of this, the replay should be up to this shortly. And just to keep you kind of in the loop from us here at Ally PLM, the next training offerings, fundamentals for new users, the next 3 offerings, or an ST3 update class if you're looking to go to synchronous and get updated there on ST3 for existing users there. More information can be found on our website at the training location there on the website. Thanks again for your time. I apologize for running over a little bit. Thanks for your attention. I really appreciate it. I hope you found this session informative. Please email us your suggestions for future Lunchbyte topics. You know, we have a list of things that we're going to keep showing each Lunchbyte every 2 weeks there. But you know, give us suggestions and we will incorporate those into future Lunchbytes. Also, if you had any questions during this session, please email them to us. You see your contact information up there on the screen, and we will get right back to you. Our next scheduled session in 2 weeks will be on exploded views and also a little bit on motion. So I appreciate your time. Thanks, and have a great day.